My presentation today, after the presentation from Bitdefender, cannot be otherwise but dull. But so is the conversation at the board of directors, generally. Which means that building on what Alex presented earlier, usually the difficulty is not actually in the security department. The difficulty in actually moving on is actually at the board of directors level. And I think many of us interact in one form or another, or we are part of board of directors. Be we're board of directors in our companies, be that we interact with our board of directors, and be that we interact with board of directors of our clients or suppliers. So the presentation now is what I think it's the kind of a next hot topic at the board level. And I think the focus for me right now is actually to try and explain what happens at board of directors, what should happen at the board of directors level, so you have the right conversation. And I think we should start from where the world is going, because as we heard earlier, it's important that we stay current, and that's actually looking forward. You can't stay current looking backwards. I mean, you can, but it's not helpful. So we tried and discussed with our strategists in terms of what are the main drivers for the next decade. And out of them, there were 4 which are definitely here, and they're going to impact the 2020 or dosage scenario. So one of them is that there are a few dominant political and economical models that emerge, which means that if we look around, we see US, we see Europe, we see Russia, we see China, and we see Middle East. So each of them have their own understanding of how the world should look like, or looks like, and they will try to influence as much of they can the world going forward. We don't have anymore just one dominant actor. The next one is the fact that the human interface with technology will come into debate. We are discussing about emerging technologies on a daily basis. We heard it numerous times today, we'll continue to hear them. Be it artificial intelligence, be it RPA, be it doesn't matter what. But the conversation is there, and I think right now the next conversation is the next supercomputer that will actually think faster, better than probably the entire globe altogether. The only problem is who has the courage to start it, because actually you started only once. So the conversation around the human and technology is a debate that will start to take place, and we've seen it. Look at GDPR. This is the first time that we've seen regulators really coming strong on business with very difficult requests that actually we all understand, but that are actually very, very difficult to implement. And if you think about it, if you look at the LA Police Department, one of their motto is try to protect. Can anyone protect us in the digital world right now? Is there like a state police? Is it like a strong enough institution that can offer the safety that we have when walking on the street? Probably not as we have it now. Would it not be there? It's probably a new institution that is going to be built. And for this, you need to have the digital identity, which is also probably coming pretty soon. The next one is the polarization of wealth, right? I mean, if you think how much wealth stay with 1% of the population, you'll be amazed. It's almost half, which means that right now we have very strong cities that dominate the world, and you can name cities in China, you can name cities in UK, you can name cities in US. And they have the power to influence the way things develop going forward. And of course, individuals. If you have only 8 individuals showing so much wealth today compared with what it was only 2 decades ago. It shows the power, the relative power that these people have versus governments. So is it really the world that we know what's going to look like, is going to look the same in the next decade? It's a question that it's worth asking now. And also, it's worth asking what's in for us. Because one way is to look at it as a big changing world full of threats, but the other one is actually to look at it as a big world full of opportunities. Because I think the industry that you're in is definitely going to impact the future. RPA will come in, but for sure the next level of service providers will have a different say in the way the ecosystems work at clients, at suppliers, in the financial system, and so on. So I think we are at the beginning of a great opportunity, which will look different probably than we see it now, but I think we should grasp it. And digital technology is actually, and the technology are actually trends which are now impacting and will impact our future lives. So at board levels, you really need to understand what are you doing. You really need to understand the ethics of it. You need to understand the moral of it, but you also need to understand how you use it efficiently, and you also need to understand how you protect yourself. And this is why I believe that having cyber and board as a topical issue on regular board meetings is the thing to go. In earlier last year, we did a study together with Microsoft right before GDPR was showing up here. And we went out and discussed with boards, and we discussed with the IT departments and with CISO, with the guys in charge with the information security, about where they are. And you'd be surprised. The main issue that the information security officers were raising was that they weren't heard at board level. They weren't really listened. They weren't really understood. So the question that everybody raised was, do we at board level really understand what's the state of security in our company? Do we really understand what's the state of security in our vendors, in our clients? Because it's an ecosystem. It's, as you've seen earlier, you may have a camera which may have a devastating attack, as it was with Netflix. But you also can have medical equipment stopping. You may also have a power plant stopping, and we've seen it happening. It's just a very small matter until death starts to show up. And that's a criminal liability on individual members of the board. Yeah, so the cyber threat landscape is vast. As I discussed earlier, there's nothing like police of the internet yet. So you need to pick and choose. You need to ensure that you actually do a proper risk assessment, that you really know where you place your resources. Yeah? I'm not going to go into details. I think you've seen this slide many times in different shapes and forms. But the idea is that right now we move from individual hackers, which were doing it from, I don't know, fun, maybe, trying to influence a decision in family, let's say, or anything else, to right now where we're looking is actually a state organized crime, basically, where they influence whatever they can. So in order to demonstrate how easy it is actually to hijack a system, I took the liberty of inviting a colleague, which is part of our ethical hacking group, to explain you how fast he actually broke in one of the accounts. So I'll invite Iwan. I'm not sure whether Iwan is here. All right.
Hello.
So Ioan is a member of our cyber team. As you've seen, I don't have a tie. He has a tie, which means it's make it probably even more difficult to identify him. But I'll actually let him present how fast you can actually enter a company.
So, please bear with me. I know how to hack systems, but I don't know how to work PowerPoint. So, well, this is a relatively simple example. Many of you would be amazed how often we encounter situations like this for our clients. So in a matter of seconds, as you can see here, we already have access. We've exploited the vulnerability in a website. Although this is a controlled environment in a training facility, which is ours. It's a virtual machine. It's actually pretty common in real life scenarios, and in a matter of seconds, as you can see here, it hasn't been 30 seconds, and we already got access to the admin page of a website, and now we can basically retrieve everything, all of the data from the database, and even modify it. So, as you can see, 30 seconds, it's not a lot to own a website. That's about what it takes, and we didn't use anything too complicated. Everything is publicly available and it's free, so actually anyone can do it.
Thank you.
Mircea, thank you.
Poți să-ți las asta că l-am păstrat. So, you can find tutorial like this on internet these days. Yeah, you can look at YouTube. There was a very famous case in former Yugoslavia where one guy just used a tutorial from the net and managed to steal a couple of millions from a bank. The lucky part was that he was caught because his VPN disconnected at some point and he didn't realize that he had to restart it. So actually anyone, if they really want to, they will try. Yeah, so that means that from a board perspective, you really need to understand that this is not just an IT issue. This is not just something that can be dealt with by the information security guys. The reason behind it is that basically it's an open door coming from employees, coming from your IoT, coming from many other aspects. So if you don't really look at it and involve yourself in actually assessing the risk at business level, most likely someone is already with you and has already got sufficient information but hasn't yet activated to ensure that you also get real damage. The next one, which is also as important as the first one, is you really need to understand your responsibilities. And that is not only in relation to what you do, but also in relation to what your suppliers are doing. Because it's very easy from the maintenance department to have a breach coming from one of your air conditioning suppliers, as it was back in time with one of the mega retailers in the States. So the risks that you are actually exposing yourself is not only coming from your company, but it's actually coming from the ecosystem that you're living. The core activity of any IT department, of any technology-driven company, has to be cyber, has to be driven by a conversation which is supported also by specialists, because alone, it's a new topic in itself. I don't think many of us are really the specialists. So without the proper support, the likelihood of actually having an issue and disclosing assets that you actually don't want to disclose is very high. Few things that you need to know, and it's not easy, right? There are a couple of things which actually may not seem familiar, like what is NIST, what's ISO 27001, what is. But they're part of your own liability, which means that you need to grasp them. I'm not going to go into the details. I think the slides will be shown. But the idea is that it's a very complex world, and there has to be a lot of homework done. Unfortunately, as of now, there's very little homework done at board levels in Romania, but as well as globally. Unfortunately for us, the fact that we didn't have a proper legislation so far made us live in a bit of a bubble right now. And in order to understand where we are, and you are working globally, which means that you are influencing clients which work in other jurisdictions, it's important to ensure that you really understand liability. Yeah. This is an example. This is an example coming from one of our studies, which is looking at budgets which relate to IT security. So the trend, as you've seen, it's pretty constant. Large companies usually allocate around 4% of their IT spending to IT security, while smaller companies actually allocate almost 4 times more. The reason behind it is that there's no economy of scale for them. And this is where probably the main risks are. The main risks actually are generated by suppliers which are actually supporting. And again, you as an industry have an entire ecosystem around you. It's important to understand where your suppliers are, where your vendors are. CISO. Without listening to your CISO, as I said earlier, without listening to someone who understands their business, it's very likely that you are not able to assess the risks. It's not something which is straightforward. It's not something which, from a technical perspective, is easy. So my kind of a biggest advice I can give is actually listen to your CISO. They complain that boards don't listen to them. There has to be a reason behind. Yeah. And last but not least, if you want to ensure you have proper measures, you need to start building a matrix. You need to start building a way of measuring the way things go forward. So things like operational risk, intellectual property risk, legal, and so on, they need to be assessed as risks, but also ensure that you have a proper matrix to follow them up. Yeah? And this is an example of a dashboard that you can use. Every time I go and discuss with security experts, they tell me that a simple thing, which is, do we really know where we are in terms of maturity? Do we really have that proper risk assessment, that proper maturity analysis is in place? And the moment you ask, you realize that actually they didn't manage to get sufficient budget, sufficient leverage from the board to even start one, to even do one. So all others really are so less known right now. Yeah? Can I ask you how many of you are finance function? Okay, so I think it's quite a big majority. I think I'm also have a background in finance, and there was a joke. I'll say it in the very. I have like 2 more minutes. Yep. So there was this old accountant who was very successful, and very many people in his team was wondering what made him so successful. So they watched him every day as he was coming to the office. He was going to his desk, closed the door, but the door had a window. So they could see that he was looking at a drawer every morning. One day he got sick. So everybody was really curious to find out what was actually the success. So they went into the room, they opened the drawer, and guess what was there? That the debit equals a credit. Don't forget ever. The debit equals a credit is the same in cyber. If you don't invest now, the credit is not going to come. Thank you.